could begin, if everybody's ready.
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, they're just checking on something.
Any way they can dim those lights a bit? I can't see anybody.
I'll check.
Someone asked me a question, I won't be able to see it.
It's not about me. Sorry.
Yeah.
And you just basically like more question time run and
Walk
whoever
around.
asks a question from
Yeah.
the audience, essentially.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, well, let's begin then.
Yep.
Is it on right now or not?
Yes.
And they're okay to be on.
Suddenly the silence fell. Hi, welcome to our first panel session today. My name is Kotowska. I will be chairing this panel. So the session is called Building from the Bottom Up, and what we are actually going to be talking today is building community spaces in Plymouth. So a little bit about realities of running social enterprises in Plymouth and challenges of actually finding, developing, managing physical spaces to do so. Our panel today is, from my right, Justin Pollard from Bread and Roses, Helen Williams from Stonehouse Action, and Ray White, up till very recently, a curator and commercial manager of Effervescent. So this session will look as following. First, I'll ask our panelists to quickly introduce themselves and their organizations. Then we'll have 20 minutes panel discussion, and then we'll proceed to open this discussion to the floor and take any questions, reflections, opinions from you guys. So let's begin. Justin, if you could tell us something about yourself.
Yeah, Justin Pollard, Bread and Roses, Community Arts Hub and Pub. Founded almost 4 years ago now. We are on Ebrington Street. We operate as a arts venue, community space, pub, music venue. We're a community interest company. We're kind of breaking even now. We decided to open a space where we thought there was 4 of us originally in the organisation. We just felt there was a lack of space for more creative, challenging, original music and art performers in Plymouth. So essentially we wanted to open a pub where everybody could come and enjoy themselves, but also be exposed to new art forms and music. The biggest challenge probably has been we didn't want to charge entrance fee because we didn't want to exclude people, but that's made it quite difficult to put on the kind of events we want without losing money. So the problem being, although we're a CIC, we're basically treated by the authorities in this state as a normal pub, so we're charged very high business rates and all the other taxes and things like that. And we're trying to give more back to our community than other pubs who are operating on a strictly private basis are, so that is where the tension always lies. Do I need to say any more?
That's enough for a start. Helen?
Hi, I'm Helen Williams. I have to make a little apology, actually, because Hannah Sloggett and Wendy Hart, who are chair and vice chair of Stonehouse Action Group, are currently gallivanting in the Ukraine, ready for the Eurovision Song Contest. So as I continue now, I will hold them in my heart with all their glitter and party atmosphere. So myself, my own involvement, I've been on the committee on and off when I can be. I've been involved in the Union Street Party, which they've run since 2010. So I've volunteered with that a few times. So I'm just going to read out a few notes that I prepared earlier about Stonehouse Action Group. So themselves, they're a group of local residents and organisations that have come together really to offer a space where people can test out new ideas. It's really a kind of a yes space. So people come into Union Corner and they have an idea, and the first response is generally yes. Afterwards, it's how can we manage that? How can we make that happen and support it and help it to grow? When Union Street Party first began 7 years ago, obviously it was quite an unusual thing to happen in the area of great history, and they also did up some shop fronts with amazing galleries over the couple of years that followed. And now the party's been going for 7 years, and it's really something where we get up to 2,000 visitors. That was for last year example, for the day itself. And over 300 local people at Union Corner have been in over the past half a year, stayed for at least 2 hours. There's our statistics. And just the values behind Union Corner are really about not trapping neighbourhoods and people into the negative stereotypes that can often happen in that area of Plymouth. And just to have fun and follow the energy of people and their ideas and coming together in community.
Thank you, Helen. Ray?
Hi, I'm Ray White. As Maria said, until very recently, about a month ago, I worked for Effervescent. I worked for them since 2011. Effervescent is a socially engaged arts organisation that works with children and young people. Historically, we were peripatetic. Very difficult to say that word. And this meant that we would do projects, we would deliver something quite amazing and great, and disappear again. So in about 2012, 2013, we started talking about having a base. And so we developed Radiant and Rumpus Cozy down on Derry's Cross. And that was for a number of reasons. It gave us stability. It gave us a place where we could work with young people in a safe environment. Before, we did a thing in 2013 called The Fish-Hearted Bride, which was an underwater play at the aquarium. And to achieve that meant working in the university, working in the Duke of Cornwall, that's always been very supportive to us, in multiple different areas when you're working with what were a group of looked after young people. So you're transporting a group that doesn't know where they are and aren't very comfortable in not ideal surroundings. So the idea was to have somewhere where they could come back to us as well, so that we didn't just disappear off the map. And that happens. People come back to us a year, 2 years later, and check in and see how we're getting on, and we see how they're getting on. So that was one of the main impetuses of opening Radiant. We also started doing socially engaged curating, which I might talk about a bit more later on. And we opened Rumpus Cozy, and Rumpus Cozy was, again, for a number of reasons. One was to generate income, to help to pay for the building, but it was also to be able to feed the groups that we work with, who often turn up not having breakfast or lunch and that kind of thing. So it served multiple purposes. And it drew people into the space so they could see what we were doing with the groups we were working with.
Thank you. Before we proceed, I just have to make a quick apology. We were going to have another 2 panelists, which were Joe and Toby Górniak from Street Factory. Unfortunately, this morning it transpired that they would not be able to attend. So once again, we're really sorry for that. But we can proceed as we are. So just to kick this off, what would you guys say is really the core purpose of what you do, why you do it, and how you arrived at where you are now?
You'll start with me again?
Looking at you.
Yeah. The core purpose. I suppose community, which is a difficult thing to define, but I think we've created a sense of a place of community, put it that way, and to foster the performing arts in our space as much as we can. That's the core aim. Provide a space or a forum for people to come. We have quite a few discussion groups and interactive groups. We've got an autistic social group which come every Wednesday. We've got a language hub, which is like a language exchange club. We've got the Real Junk Food Project, does a pop-up every month. So just to provide a space in a kind of, I think that where we're slightly different from other organisations like us is we are actually just a pub as well at the end of the day. So there's a lot of informal community action there as well, which I think is good, because sometimes, like a space like this, for example, a lot of people aren't comfortable in a lecture hall, but they are more comfortable just sitting around a table in a pub talking about things. So I think that's our little angle. The problem being we are also open to everybody, so you have constant friction between different activities at the same time. But that's our core aim.
Let's mix it up a bit, shall we?
Yeah, go on then. Yeah,
Quite good.
keep them on their toes.
Well, as I kind of said, there were those focuses on having visibility, and actually that was partly to do with the health of the organisation, because this idea of doing projects through Cornwall used to be sort of region-wide, mainly Cornwall and Devon. You would deliver something and then disappear into the ether again, and neither could the young people find us again. Social media help with that, so people can keep in better contact with us. So the main focus of why we have that building is for the work we do with the groups. And also, because we have a shop front, it's a massive glass building, if any of you know it. And we can put exhibitions on there which are curated by the young people. So, and they are of a quality, actually the best exhibitions in Plymouth, I would say, but maybe I'm a bit biased in that. But they are contemporary art exhibitions that are accessible, that often talk about issues and things that the young people want to explore and express. So it was also that outward-facing ability to reach people and talk to them about things that groups wanted to talk about was another main reason for having the building.
Rachel?
Helen.
Helen, I'm so
That's
sorry.
my middle name, actually.
Oh, there you go. We can go with that.
Core value. One aspect I would definitely say is to be a positive presence on Union Street, first and foremost. It's a really interesting street with so much history, and yet so many derelict buildings, empty spaces, places where people might not feel so safe when they're walking through at night. And therefore, as a venue of positive presence, it's also a place to draw people together, to come together and explore activities and ways of being together that are sane and life-affirming, to explore conversations that might not necessarily happen in other contexts, to provide a space for scout groups, for workshops for adults around wood carving or well-being or certain healing therapies or yoga. I mean, kind of anything goes in that space. As I said before, it's a yes space, and then we work out how afterwards. I myself have been a benefactor of being able to use the space. Just in short, I'm in the process of developing a project called Being Together in Conversation. So I've been running a project there where I facilitate conversation circles for adult women only. It's going to progress into different groups of people, mixed and separate, and different contexts and different venues. But without Union Corner, I wouldn't have been able to set up that programme, and now they're looking to commission it a second time through. This time we really want to try and reach local residents, so looking at how we can bring out people in the community who might not step out of their door for various reasons and come to a place where they can speak and be listened to and find their voice. And remember, how joyful it can be to be together in community.
All of you guys are talking about providing space for a purpose. Can you just tell us a little bit about that process of actually finding an appropriate space and the challenges that go with it, whether it was in the developing process or even managing that space in a current state?
I think over the last few years, you've had a loss of public space, you know, through privatisation of various things, libraries, schools, you know, parks, city centres. You know, there's a kind of lack of places for people to gather now. And I think probably all three organisations are filling that hole, which used to be provided by perhaps the state, you know, and social clubs, you know, working men's clubs, things like that, and trade union meetings, all those kind of things have faded over the last 20, 30 years. But people actually need them. They need non-commercial. I mean, my organisation is commercial on some level, but we try and incorporate non-commercial values into our operation to allow things to happen there that wouldn't happen on a strictly commercial basis, because everywhere else is increasingly commercialised and privatised. And I think that's, you know, we're like little dandelions going up through the cracks in the pavement, you know, but the pavement has been covering over all the free space for a long time. But I think that people really, really need those kind of non-commercialised spaces in order to foster community, because if everything is commercialised, there's always another agenda other than just coming together.
Would you say that is, because everything is so commercialized, is even more difficult for you guys to actually bring those independent things up into public realm?
Yeah, because, you know, we're operating in a commercial world, in a capitalist world, and every decision you make that is not purely commercial, you lose out to another organisation that you're maybe not directly competing with, but in some way competing with. You know, Wetherspoons is my biggest bane, because they're strictly commercial, and then people coming in and say, oh, it's a bit expensive in here. And I go, yeah, well, that's because we try and do this and that and use local suppliers, pay our workers decent wage, you know. But you're always competing with that commercial mindset, and that does make it more difficult. And things like business rates, at the moment, we don't get any exemption on business rates. We get exactly the same as any other pub, for example, even though we are a community interest company, not for profit, which I think would be a really good thing to change if we could.
Is it a bit of a struggle to make the ends meet then?
Yeah, always. You're always having to weigh up your core values against your commercial sustainability, basically. VAT, you know, paying tax bills all the time, but you're wanting to actually put on other events, but you have to make sure you just keep within the boundaries of commerce.
In terms of Plymouth, I myself, in a previous role, I used to work for Groundwork Southwest, and even in an independent capacity, I've wanted to find a building since I moved here, which is 2009. And Plymouth is a tough place to find buildings. A lot of the centre of town, yes, it's still empty. Woolworths is still empty, and Derry's up until recently, although it's being redeveloped now. A lot of these places and a lot of the empty shops are not owned by the council. They're owned by private landlords and quite often sort of pension funds in London. And they are quite happy to sit on a commercial rent that's still being paid, rather than give it over to something else. So almost by happenstance, there was it's probably still going, there's a council initiative called Your Space, isn't it? Where they try and encourage people to access buildings. The difficulty they have is they don't have any buildings. So on the Your Space website, there are pictures of the ground in Cornwall Street. So you can hire this bit of the road, you know, this bit of the pavement. And this isn't their fault necessarily, other than they sold a lot of stuff off a lot of stuff they sold to Plymouth Community Homes, who are also themselves not very keen on giving things over to different organisations. PCA have had some luck doing that in the West End, but it's not an easy thing to do. So just by chance, the people that were running your space said, well, I think we know a landlord that might be amenable to doing something. And the corner building used to be a Halifax. And the lease was coming up to the end. And so we negotiated with this landlord quite vigorously. And when you've never done it before, negotiating with a commercial landlord is quite terrifying because they know what they're doing. But we negotiated an agreement with him. And he did that because Halifax actually bought themselves out of the lease. So he had money in his pocket. And what he didn't want to do was end up having to pay the rates himself. So plonking an arts organisation in there, for him, made sense because no one was going to pay the rates, the rent, sorry, which he was looking at about £100,000 a year. No one was going to pay that at that particular moment in economic history. So he allowed us to move in, and we stayed, and we continually renegotiated the lease because the intention was that he wanted that level of money from us eventually. And he's a good guy, but he's a businessman. And realistically, he would rather we're there than not there. So in some respects, we have a certain amount of control on staying because he doesn't want to be landed with the rates. We do get rates reduction because Effervescent is a charity. And when we first moved in, actually, the council were quite supportive of us. They gave us rates relief in the first 2 years, even though we weren't at that point a charity. So they kind of did what they could to help us move in and crack on. So, yeah, but it was a coincidence, happenstance that it happened, really, rather than...
I think that is what tends to happen in Plymouth, like you said, for the reasons you laid out. I mean, ours is an historic pub, but what happened was it was owned by Courage Brewery. It wasn't making them any money, so they sold it to Clever Student Lets, who operate student accommodation above us, but they couldn't get change of use for the bar because it's an historic pub. So we've ended up with this space which doesn't really quite work because we haven't got a kitchen, we haven't got a dining room, we haven't got accommodation. If we had the whole building, it would suddenly work much better. But we've got this small space which our landlord can't really do anything with. So he's kind of happy to let us have it. Yeah. And he's been amenable with the rent, put it that way, and things like that. But I mean, you know, we never see it. It's kind of, we just happen to have landed this lucky deal because of history, you know, because of the restrictions put on the building. But if he could change it completely into a block of student flats, he would. So, yeah. Like you said, it's happenstance sometimes. I think, you know, the cracks where you can get in.
Yeah, and kind of in terms of that also being an opportunist in a positive way, I think not having been personally involved in locating appropriate venues or going through that process, but having listened to Hannah and Wendy speak about it and heard them comment about, you know, the times when they had to kind of wait and pause and things seemed to be going really slow, was when they felt like they had to wait for the confirmation, they had to wait for the permission or the red tape. And sometimes they just went through and they just did it. And I think sometimes it's just remembering that actually we do have the capacity to do things ourselves, to have more confidence in our capabilities to come together and to find these locations instead of waiting for the powers that be to say yes and to come forward and to say, yes, have a look in this area, or here's this scheme, but just to go and do it.
Have you had any plans for any further developments at all in terms of your properties, in terms of your future plans?
Union Corner, the lease is going to run out in 2018, and I know that they are looking for future successor tenants to take over the space in a permanent way, obviously something that would tie in with their vision and their outlook and their objectives for the street in general. I know they have some ideas about doing something similar along the whole street. They have something called Nudge Community Business. Perhaps if you see Hannah or Wendy or know of them, you can ask them more about it. But I know it's something to do with looking into further empty spaces along Union Street and bringing life back to them. So, yeah, if anyone's interested in taking on Union Corner next year.
Would you guys have done anything differently if you knew how difficult the whole process would be, just looking back at it from where you are now?
I think from our perspective, we tried to do too much at once. We tried to do music, food, art. We just tried to do too much, and we weren't in control of, spending and where, money was leaking out, and we were unaware. We were a little bit overly ambitious. I think the problem we had is we were really busy really suddenly, and we weren't quite ready to manage that level of turnover. So I think that's important to have a plan and stick to it, and try not to get too excited.
I think I remember when we first went into the building, this is kind of an aside really, being very adamant with the landlord that I wanted to take a record, a bit like when you move in a rental place and they photograph the carpets and the kitchen and make sure everything's, so when you move out they can not give you a deposit back because they don't want to. And I photographed stains on the floors and leaks in the ceiling and the walls. And I did all that, and I insisted that he had all this stuff. And then we ripped the place apart. So it was ridiculous. We knocked walls down. That was suspending we had a suspended ceiling in the whole building, which is much bigger than this space. And as we knocked the walls down, the ceiling came down with it. And I remember one day standing there with Ellie, the CEO, and going, we're just going to have to rip the whole thing down. So we took the whole ceiling down. And we didn't tell the landlord we were going to do that bit. But once it was down, and he couldn't do a lot about it. The building as it stands is functional. We really did it with about $5,000 and community help and help from an FE college that did a lot of work with plumbing and building and that kind of stuff. The name of which I can't remember, which is terrible. The end result is fine, but it killed us. It was the most extraordinarily stressful, physically demanding nightmare that I wouldn't want to do it again. So I'm glad we did it, and it's great, but I think next time I'll find a building that doesn't quite need so much doing to it. Or just leave it as it is. That's fine. Looks like a bank.
We'll work with it.
It's great. Yeah, we'll work with it. We'll use the tools.
Helen, could you tell us anything about your reflections on the Union Street corner? Would you have done anything differently?
I don't feel like I can comment on that enough.
Okay.
Not being involved enough in the in the foundations of it. So I'll pass. Thank you.
Fair enough. We're talking a little bit about your buildings and what you guys do independently. Do you have any comments on the wider cultural, artistic life of Plymouth as a city?
Well, I think the big problem with Plymouth, and I've been kind of looking at another venue, but not looking for another venue. We're often too small for the kind of acts we want to put on. And it's really difficult a mid-sized venue, We've got the pavilions, which is what it is, and then we've got pubs, and we've got nothing in between. I mean, what I'm talking about is a small theatre stroke music venue, essentially, and it's a real, I can't see how it's going to happen without council intervention, and, the council hasn't got any money at the moment, so, because actually Exeter Phoenix is the kind of thing I'm talking about, but that's funded in part by Devon County Council, because it's in Exeter, whereas Plymouth has a lot more demands on the council and less income, and art's on a priority for various reasons at the moment, but I think we really miss that. I get bands all the time write to me from Bristol and London, you know, we're a 5-piece classical Indian stroke jazz band. Great, let's put it on. But they want £2,000-3,000, and we in a venue of our size, we just can't make that work, you know.
Of course.
I think that's
£2,000-3,000 in terms of pay.
Yeah.
I mean, right.
Yeah, these are bands, you know, they're not bands. You probably, if you listen to Radio 3 Lake Junction, you'd hear them. You know, they've got record deals, but they're not commercially well known, and they're touring, and they, you know, and they're interesting acts, which we don't. You know, you see them in Bristol, you see them in Exeter, even in Totnes, and then often they may hop to Falmouth, but this sort of act doesn't play in Plymouth because there isn't a venue.
Because when I first heard you speak about the lack of this kind of venue, I am aware that there is a venue hopefully opening this year, if not early next year, which I think is possibly the type of venue you're talking about. It's called the Underground Theatre. It's the chap from Stalton's Pharmacy in West Hoe, him and his family have bought at auction an old chapel on Emma Place in Stonehouse, and it's beautiful. I think Camden Market used to be there at some point for a period of time. So it's a church, an old chapel, 150 years old. It used to have a congregation of about 500 at one time. He bought it at auction a couple of years ago, and he's got permission to turn it into a community theatre, which is going to be kind of an all-inclusive, open, 7 days a week activities during the day for people perhaps who are not working or the older generations. Buskers nights, residents theatre group, resident writers, resident bands, a venue that emerging theatre groups or drama groups or any kind of groups can use that's affordable. I'm not sure if it's the kind of place that can tick the box in terms of being able to put on an event where the band needs to be paid £2 or £3 grand, but you know, it's definitely worth considering because the space will be able to take 100 capacity with a move around techie tower and proper stage and lighting and sound equipment. So in the long run, it could be. So there's a good positive note.
The conflict always is in Plymouth, because Plymouth is a low-income city. People don't have disposable income to spend on cultural
and
activities.
In that area too,
you know,
in Stonehouse.
in the way they might do in Totnes or Exeter, for example. That's, you know, it's always a conflict. That's good news.
I'm quite optimistic about the arts in Plymouth, though. Given the restrictions for spaces, etc., that we've already explored, I think if I used to work in Newcastle, and the time I lived there, you could go, can I have that building, please? And someone would go, yeah, sure. Not to keep, but to do pop-up exhibitions or to do, and in the 7 years I was there, like it really exploded and changed as a city. Plymouth doesn't really explode. It expands very slowly, but it is expanding, I think. So when I first moved here, there was fewer arts venues than there are now. So now we have Cast, we have Studio 102, Radiant. I think there would be more if it was easier, I think, to access places. So it's a continual, ongoing thing, but it's certainly not in decline. Let's put it that way. It's in a slow renaissance that's picking up speed. There are things like Plymouth Culture, who is kind of like a supportive umbrella body that is very, very much active in the middle of things. There are different arts groups, you know, like collectives working. So it is happening. It's probably not going to explode, but it will carry on continuing to become more and more, I think.
Well, I think it's time we open this discussion to the audience. So if you guys have any questions, reflections, opinions you'd like to share, if you can just raise your hand. We have a couple of roving mics that will be handed to you. Yeah, gentleman on the back.
Oh, thank you. I have a question for Justin, really, which you mentioned about, talked about business rates earlier. I obviously work with a number of venues as a social enterprise. We pay, full taxes, corporation tax, business rates, and all things like that, which I understand absolutely is certainly a burden. But part of what that gives us is an authority, I suppose, within the powers that be and the economic department to sort of, which I guess the wider voluntary and community, maybe charitable sector doesn't have. And I guess we've been around this sort of debate. We could campaign to probably get business rate relief, but is there a danger that that undermines that possible authority that we have to sort of transform and challenge?
Because the authority is gained from your generating income for government, and so by paying full rates, you're operating commercially and generating income, so therefore you have some leeway. Is that and generating employment? Yeah, you're probably right.
Which means that certain people in authority will, I guess, value us more in different ways?
Yeah, I think it's the whole idea of a social enterprise, and you probably know more about this than me, but it's not quite clearly defined yet, and it's an emerging thing, the balance between being the enterprise and the social benefit, and I think it probably goes on a case-by-case basis. Our big problem is a majority of our income just comes from drink sales, and that's taxed very heavily, and it's hard to absorb that into our operating costs without passing on the cost to the consumer and therefore becoming exclusive, and that's our tension,
Anybody else?
Can I add something about that? I think that could be the case that paying full whack gives you more authority. However, the majority of, slightly different in your case, Justin, but the majority of arts organisations pretty much survive on lottery or, donations of some description, whether it's from trusts and foundations or the Arts Council or that kind of thing. And so actually, what you're doing there, in some respects, is saying, we're not a commercial enterprise, but we're going to pay commercial rates, which is basically we're going to take lottery money and give it to the council, which doesn't, to me, make much sense, really, because I would want the council to go, we don't want that lottery money. You need to do that because what you do is really important culturally. You're not making a profit in the city. You're not lining your pockets with all these millions you're making from working with young people. So actually, I'd prefer it if the council, which they do at the moment, some councils have scrapped rate relief and that kind of stuff. And lots of councils have stopped supporting the arts at all through funding, not Plymouth so far. But I think there's an argument that you shouldn't if you value what it is that's actually taking place in the city. And then you look at the return on investment of a cultural city where people actually come for that engagement and that purpose and spend money. So there's an argument against it, I would say.
The gentleman in the yellow t-shirt.
Thank you. Justin made the point earlier about this all occurring against the backdrop of a shrinking local state. And this is really happening in Plymouth quite a lot, with councils looking to sell off green space for development, looking to close libraries, looking to reduce support for organisations like Refugee Council and other well-known organisations. And it's a question really of them whether charitable sectors can realistically fill the gap, and whether they should be filling the gap in some of those cases, because often charitable sectors expect their workers to work for very low pays, which they don't, I'm not saying pointing any fingers, but there have been cases where there's been a lot of exploitation of volunteers and individuals, but also the governance and the accountability of those organisations. Often they have a lot of enthusiastic people who come into them and they work for a few years, but they don't institutionalise and they don't have that governance which keeps them going for over the long term. So lots of things pop up for a short period of time and then disappear. And we do see a certain amount of churn, even in the sort of music venues. We've lost Voodoo Lounge and the White Rabbit in recent years, and other ones have come on. There is a sort of churning in this process, and there is a danger that it's a group of people doing something on behalf of the working class and all the people in their area, and those people don't have a great deal of say over it. And bear in mind that a lot of the lottery money comes from hopeful people putting their £1 and £2 on every week. Thank you.
Could you tell me what a question is?
How do you make organisations more accountable to the communities they purport to serve?
Seems to be a difficult one.
I think there are some things that voluntary, charitable, social enterprises can't do properly and shouldn't do, that the state should do. And I think you're right, there's a shrinking of the state, and the charitable sector, or the third sector, whatever you want to call it, shouldn't be expected to fill that. You know, mental health, for example. Although there is areas where arts organisations can help people in different ways. And I think that the arts is the one area where bureaucracy can stifle things, and it's always difficult working with government organisations when you're doing artistic endeavours, because they're very much outcome driven, and it's very hard to quantify what the value of your outcomes are. You know, even talking in that sense is strange to me. And that's a problem when you're taking money from the state and you're doing something which is difficult to quantify, and then you're having to justify it back to taxpayers. It's always going to be very complicated, particularly with the arts, I think.
And the things with the statutory bodies talk about churn and sort of, institutionalisation, really. The lack of churn within governmental bodies means that actually, generally, they have one way of working and one way of understanding how they deliver a service. And so as an arts organisation that engages with social services and mental health issues, and NHS and the police, convincing them that it's worth taxpayers' money to use a different approach to reach participants is often quite a trick, because they're used to putting the money safely where they know it might not work, but they know what they're doing. So they'd rather spend the money in a way that might not actually be getting them the results, but to take that leap of faith and to do something with a third sector organisation is often quite challenging to them. But I would encourage them to do it more, obviously.
Can we have a next question? I think that...
I was wondering if I could try and answer that question.
Please, feel free.
Chair here.
Could you just wait a minute for a mic so we can all hear you?
Thank you. I think we're all concerned about this, aren't we? We know that we've moved from a 20th century where things happened in one way to a 21st century where we have austerity, a shrinking state, we have Brexit and populism. We're in a different world. I think there are ways that we can deal with that world, and I think the question about, who picks this up, how do we do it, is exactly about how we take back control. So I'm a very... my title is CEO, but I work with Plymouth Octopus Project, which is the voluntary and community sector getting together. And our feel about the 21st century and how we deal with this and move forward is, one, collaboration. Yes, obviously some groups take grants, they don't get the grants, the volunteers drop out, but we actually have to build something, and I think we are building something in Plymouth, where people wanting to do good things in communities, with communities, for people, get together and talk to those people in communities. So we've been approached, and they are philanthropists, they are grant funders, but there are people saying to us, like the way you're thinking, like the way you're reaching out and trying to put things together. Could you have a think about how that's really going to work in Plymouth? How we're going to get the voice, as you say, of the communities, not nice people doing things for communities, but how you get the voice of communities, how that can gain some power, how if we give you a few million quid to do this, how that will leverage the council to be thinking, oh, this is nice, we'll do it with you, and think in different ways. So, you know, the kinds of ideas we're putting forward are things like this, really. Town hall meetings in different parts. Let's go to Efford and see what Efford wants, and then give people, say, OK, here's some people offering us some money, here's some money. Let's do some participatory budgeting. I think there are things moving in Plymouth that are trying to answer some of those questions. And that's not a question, sorry, it was an attempt to answer. I don't know if it was helpful.
Thank you very much. Can we have a lady just behind?
Hello. Yes, I was just wondering, the gentleman on the end there who's running from a pub, whether he had come across and used, because I did a lot of research and tried terribly hard. I don't come from Plymouth. I live in Exmouth, and one part of Exmouth which was newly built, and therefore we had no social amenities, and we still don't. We haven't even got a bus shelter that we could do something in. But I was looking around for possibilities, and I came across something which is run by the Prince of Wales, actually, and they were very nice and actually tried to help me. My problem was that we don't even have a pub. But if you're working from a pub, there is an organisation run by the Prince of Wales. I just wondered if you'd used it. It's called The Pub is the Hub. And it does seem to me that there's a big issue around that with communities and with the death of the public house, really, which once provided massive community resources for people and for various reasons has died the death. The pub is not the institution it was. But there can't just be the Prince of Wales, there surely are other organisations as well, whereas you've at least got a pub building, and it sounds like yours has got a preservation thing on it to say that you can't change the use, that even if Charles didn't help you, are there not other organisations? I'm sure they would help you, actually. They're really nice. You can just phone up the palace and have a word with them. I did it on several occasions. Out of utter desperation, I'm still desperate, but you can actually do it. Just get their help. There's packs arrived and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're talking about the pub is the hub, and just the Plumstead Foundation is connected to that. The problem we had, I phoned them up, they're mainly focused on rural pubs.
Yes.
You know, pubs where you have the pub becomes this little shop and a post office and a pub and community space. So it started with that. So they're not so involved. They've got one or two urban pubs. I think they're just dipping their toes in it. So I phoned them up and I said, we've got this community interest company which is running this pub, not-for-profit in Plymouth. Hey, you've got grants available. They said, oh yes, we have up to about £500,000. Because our long-term aim would be to buy the building. You know, if we could buy the whole building, it would suddenly become much more commercially and financially sustainable. And they said, oh, we only give the grant to organisations that don't have the pub yet. So I said, what do you mean? I said, okay, so if we shut down, I could apply. And they said, yes, the pub has to shut down. Oh. And then you have to make an application for a grant to open a community pub, and then you can reopen. So we're kind of in a bind because we're already doing what they're trying to support, so they can't support us. So yeah, the problem.
Thank you very much. Can we have a question from the gentleman in the blue shirt just here?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, basically I've been living in Plymouth I grew up here all my life, and I moved away for a bit briefly and then came back again. And I've just noticed there's a slightly there's pockets, there's different areas, you know, there's people here, people there, they're all sort of apathetic in here, going places in here, and it sort of seems a bit disjointed. And I feel like the city could be unified more if there's just a bit more, you know, as you're talking about enterprise and things like that. I guess my question would be, how would you link that up more efficiently?
I think I'm really interested in investigating that actually as a city. Just because of my work, I've ended up working at TR2 and Theatre Royal and the Barbican and Cast and other various venues, and kind of having these connections already is a natural recipe to begin nurturing those connections further. And maybe I'm biased because it's the area of work that I'm in. I believe it's about exactly this, about providing facilities and activities that are centred around conversations that are not just within the closed groups of each organisation or venue, but then start to spread out where we have conversations between the Barbican Theatre and Theatre Royal and the Underground Theatre, 3 different theatres achieving 3 different kind of outcomes, but with also some cross-purposes. Then perhaps one venue, conversations with their customers or their clients, and just really starting to build kind of like a web. But I think it has to happen really quite slowly as well. You can't just kind of leap into that process. But it's really about conversations, about just coming together. And I think we've really kind of lost a lot of that capacity to be able to have more meaningful conversations rather than just superficial, you know, on Facebook update what you're having for your dinner kind of thing, which is so common.
Any more questions? Lady on the right.
Hi. Just to follow on from what Helen just said, I feel like you're talking from the provider point of view, but as people coming to find that sort of countercultural exhibitions, gigs, whatever, it'd be great for people who are coming to them to have somewhere where they could go. I mean, it used to be like, I'm from London, you know, the dreaded place, but you'd have like Time Out or something like that. And I think the internet's changed the way that communities work. So people are maybe much more, you know, they're focused on tweeting or looking at things like that from their own space. But how would you change that from being a inward-looking, an internet-looking, to a more real-time looking thing? I mean, I've taken part in the Art Weekender, and I found that a fantastically positive experience. And the people from Totnes and Exeter that you talk about, who maybe can afford to pay to come to your gigs or whatever, you know, come to the Art Weekender. And I think that it's about mixing people up a bit more. I mean, how do you feel about, you know, how people gain information about all your different events? I'm not familiar how you do it. You know, whether you have an online presence, or you know, what like the guy here was talking about combining everything, or not combining everything from an organisational point of view, but combining everything from a I don't want to say consumer because that sounds terribly, you know, but from an audience. Thank you, audience, viewer. You know, people who are coming to the things, we want to know. You know, people want to come. You know, it'd be great to bring more people to Plymouth from around, because that will bring money into Plymouth and balance up maybe the demographic financially, if that's what is. You know, seems to be a lot of talk of finance, but I actually think that what you can gain in cultural capital from the arts is just way beyond, you know, paying rates or VAT or rent. I think that's why I would come to somewhere, is because of a rich culture. So how do you offer it out to the people who are seeking it, is what I'm trying to say. I think that's maybe my question. It took me a long time to get there.
In terms of online resources, I know there was an app called Artery.
No, it's still going.
Is it still going? So, I mean, I can't speak any more about that, but I don't know, perhaps you can.
I don't know very much about it, but the friend I went to school with actually is part of that organisation. They came in to see me yesterday. It's essentially an app on your phone which tells you about cultural events in Plymouth. As far as I understand it, I'm not very tech savvy. But I think Potentially one of the...
Tech-savvy people.
Yeah, one of the problems is I think people are because of Facebook, Twitter, the internet, people are bombarded by too much information all the time. Because people come in to me and say, oh, I wanted to come to that gig last week, but you didn't advertise it. And I think, well, we've got a website, we've got a Facebook page, we've got a Twitter account, we give out paper calendars. I don't know, apart from putting posters up all around the town, what more we can do, but people still miss stuff. And I think actually it's because there's too much information. People are just bombarded and they forget things. Because certainly that's the case with me. About 300 emails a day, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you solve it. We used to have fanzines, you know, we used to make handwritten fanzines and hand them out outside gigs and things like that. But we also had independent bookshops and independent record shops which would promote things like that. It's very difficult with all the chains. They won't even let you put up a poster, most of the shops in town, because they're chains and they're not allowed to, the managers in the store are not allowed to have independent thought, you know.
So there is a lack of physical places where, you know, we always produce flyers for our exhibitions, but actually the number of places you can put them in Plymouth is quite restrictive, and then you've got to, the people go there have got to pick that flyer up and be interested. So flyers aren't what they used, you know, I remember a while ago running a flyer list and then posting it to my email, to my list, you know, because it was pre-social media. So those people got those flyers and they were signed up to a postal list. That doesn't tend to happen so much anymore, partly because that's expensive compared to putting something on Facebook or, you know, free social media. So I think possibly there's a slight responsibility for the audience here, because if I was going to go and travel to Liverpool tomorrow, I would look up what was in Liverpool and I would find out where I wanted to go. And on Facebook, I'd ask my friends that live in Liverpool where I should go. So I think the idea that you can give everything to everyone and put it in front of them, as has been said, there's so much to look at that I don't think it even scratches the surface anymore. So I think there's an argument for the audience being a bit proactive and going, I'm going to find out myself. Sorry, you know, because it's so difficult to, you can't stick things under people's noses quite so easily anymore, you know, because things like Time Out and fanzines don't exist so much. So.
Gentleman on the front.
Microphone or shall I project?
Well, if you can do both, that will be best
I'll
solution.
try. Set myself up for a fall here. I'm just wondering how many of these projects run on a cooperative basis, so you've got bottom-up control, and how many of them are CEO, board, done to sort of model?
Well, we're a very small organisation, so it's a cooperative organisation. I am officially the manager, but that just means I get most of the grief from both ends. I think it depends on the size.
Being a registered charity, we had a board of trustees, but there wasn't much of a hierarchy because within Effervescent, last year we had an apprentice and a part-time communications officer, but beyond that, there was two of us, so there wasn't much of a hierarchy really. So you could say it was a fine cooperative because there were just two people running the whole organisation, but it was within a structure of a board of trustees, etc.
I would say Union Corner very much cooperative. Yes, there is the chair, the vice chair and the secretary, but the committee meetings are run very much in an equality-based, everybody is included, and also outside of that, so whenever we have activities or events within the space, we might engage into conversation with people coming in about the process that Union Corner has been through, what people feel about the space and what they'd like to see in the space, and kind of lots of output of evaluations to the community. So it's all involvement, very much cooperative.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Gentleman at the back, please.
Yeah, so basically what I'd look at, well, a couple of things. First of all, I mean, it's great to see you here, but for example, Stonehouse Action, it sounds like a really good thing, but I'd never heard of it. So I think that is kind of a problem among these things of sort of, it might be worthwhile sort of cross-promoting in a sense, you see what I mean, in some kind of way. So if you go to Stonehouse Action, you maybe see something for what's on at Bread and Roses or vice versa, and, your charity and this kind of thing. But I think as well, I want to ask the question is, these organisations are great, but how do we, when you talk about the streets being privately owned, how do we do that taking back control sort of thing? And I think organisations like Stonehouse Action, it sounds like a good way of doing it, because you'll have I hope you can speak on this, the transformative effect of action on people. So when they take part in it, they gain confidence and they, gain the ability to organise things. So, we need to organise more things like that. And, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, I know, but the sort of the elephant in the room, I think, is that we're in an election period at the moment, and we talk about funding being cut and austerity, but we also, I'm sure most of the people in here would agree that this is a political choice by a Conservative government in power, enforced in Plymouth by a Conservative government in the local council. So we need to bring these art things, together. I would say with political movements, such as the Labour Party, such as I'm here representing Stand Up to Racism, so we need to build this as well. So there's an anti-racist movement in Plymouth, and we need to take this onto the streets too, take back control, as I say. So yeah, I would suggest we need to do that. We need to, So I suppose what I'm suggesting is perhaps, would any of you be interested in any sort of day of action in the city centre, for example? Representing Stonehouse Action, for example, would kick out the Tories and all those lines. So, that would be my question, really.
I think what I understand from that is perhaps instead of just having this event today and everyone disperses and then what happens, having some kind of follow-on, that we have a legacy, that we continue what we're doing today further. And speaking for myself, yes, and I would imagine in whatever format that may be, that yes, that's why we're here, to continue this forwards.
I think it's both. I mean, I've been on many days of action in my time, and we are where we are. Yes, it is a political decision. Austerity is a political decision by the Conservative government, but we also need to build grassroots organisations and grassroots communities, because I don't think change will come just through the ballot box. It has to come from the grassroots as well. And these sort of organisations are a small part of that. There are lots of other different types of organisations that you need as well. But, it's a combination of both. Because if there's not pressure from the ground, the government, even if it's a Labour government, won't put forward fundamental change.
Yes, I think, personally, yes, austerity is a lie, and Brexit is a nightmare. But I can't speak for Effervescent anymore because I don't work for that organisation, but I do know that in Jack Vitek organising this, he found it very difficult for cultural and arts organisations to actually be involved. And there's a sad but practical truth is nearly everyone working in this field is reliant on someone else above them, be it the council, be it funders. And actually, it's incredibly difficult to put your foot down and go, this is what we think, because the reality is we have a Tory council here, and actually it would be slightly foolhardy for an organisation to do that if it wants to survive and do the good work that it's doing. So it's very difficult, because what we do is work with very vulnerable young people and help improve their life chances. And actually putting your hand up and going, yeah, but we don't like you, is kind of slightly self-defeating, even though on a personal level, yes, I would do that. So organisationally, it's an inconvenient truth that it's very difficult for organisations to do that, sadly. But that's the political reality of it. Possibly. So grassroots is definitely the way to go, because individually, yes, absolutely. That is the way to go, because you can say and do whatever you bloody well want to. But any organisation, so you won't get even large corporate companies, particularly unless it's Wetherspoons, putting their particular views on show, because the winds change, and actually you don't want to be on the wrong side of the argument when. Even if you're a completely commercial organisation, especially then, probably. So it's no different being a charity reliant on funding in one way to being a completely corporate institution on the other. It just doesn't make practical sense, very sadly.
Thank you very much. Please.
Yeah, I think, but isn't that the point of taking control? Because I think, taking control for me means, fighting and, it is a fight, right, against the status quo. And obviously the status quo is there to actually limit your freedom and how you express yourself. And you do provide a platform, for communication and what have you, but still you're sort of targeting, sorry to say, but a middle class kind of audience. So how do you incorporate, the working class in within, I don't really like using the word working class because it sort of doesn't make sense to me at all. But, I think how do you incorporate the less well-off into, this bigger dream or aspect? And the other thing is, don't you think it should, you should actually, have the purpose, what you stand for, and that is regardless of, whether Uncle Tom hands you like a penny or two just to survive, to try and, I know you still need to survive within the real world, but at the same time, ideas do actually make a difference, and they're the ones that actually create communities, the community cohesiveness. So I think I'd say that slightly cop out, by saying, you sort of make a decision of whether you need to survive or not as a community-driven project. So how would you, first of all, how would you come up with an idea where you're not selling off, what basically the root cause of the issue is, if it makes sense at all?
I would say, in response to that, our fundamental aim was to work with the groups that we wanted to work with. So that overrode any idea of going, we want to work with this group of survivors of child sexual exploitation, and we're going to work with Bernardo's on this, and we're going to work with the council on this, but actually we're going to, at the same time, have a political stance which makes it very difficult for them to work with us. And that doesn't work for us because we want to work with that group. So actually, our own particular view, politically, is irrelevant. The important thing is to work with the groups we want to work with. So, slightly cold as it sounds, I will take money from a Tory council, thank you very much, because they allow us to do the work that we're doing. And the groups we work with, and class is a very difficult thing in the country, to determine, but they are from very vulnerable, quite often disadvantaged backgrounds. So the people that come to our shows, you might be right, that actually it's more of a middle-class pursuit, and that's something that's very interesting to try and break down. And that's partly because there's a kind of psychological barrier to going into a gallery space. I get it myself. If I go to a really nice London gallery and the girl at the desk has a fringe and red lipstick and doesn't smile when I go in, I don't feel I should be there. I find it a really intimidating place. And so that idea that people get used to culture being part of their lives probably goes back to school in the way, and schooling. And so there is an interesting barrier. There is an interesting class barrier within, particularly visual arts, less music and certainly less pubs. And possibly less with Stonehouse Action. So there's a real thing to tackle there, but my own particular political view shouldn't come into conversations to, this sounds terrible, to secure money to do the work that we do, which is for social justice, which is for the good of young people. So I don't care how I get that money. I wouldn't take it off an arms dealer. There are limits, but you know, these political squabbles which affect us all personally, and yes, the groups we work with are going to be affected by having a Conservative government. So there's a reason to vote and make sure that you spread the message to vote. But in terms of actually in the day-to-day running of a business, there is no political reason to bring that into the mix, I think. People can disagree with me if they want, but I think they are two separate coins of the same very difficult coin.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if anyone agrees or disagrees with that.
Well, I think it's, you know, in your particular organisation, you have a very specific aim. And I mean, the question is, where do you draw the line? You know, you wouldn't take money from an arms dealer, but would you take money from an investment bank? Would you take money from ICI? You know, I don't know. Where do you draw the line? Everybody's got their own line, I guess. That's their own moral framework.
We would, not an investment bank, maybe Triodos, which is a social investment bank. So they, again, that's rich people putting money into an investment to get return on their money. That comes back to there's no such thing as clean money, really. It's all gone through some kind of dirty process. Should we even take lottery funding? Because, you know, a higher percentage of people that are working class, for want of a better term, buy lottery tickets. So you're kind of taking from the poor to make an arts thing, and yes, it is quite, within the visual arts, there is still a predominance of middle class people coming to that thing. You could go around and you could just go, right, let's not do any of it. This is all just nightmare. But, you know, the world has to go on, and you need to find the best way through, whilst trying to be as ethically sound as you possibly can be within that circumstance, obviously.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one last quick question, and yeah.
It's a response to things as much as it is a question. I grew up in Plymouth. I was born here. I've lived here almost all of my life. I grew up here in the 90s, and most of my mates just wanted to move away because they said that nothing happened. But to my mind, stuff has always happened here. You just had to kind of get off your arse and go and find it. And it's a bit of a response to the lady that said about how things are advertised. The best way that things are advertised is for you to go somewhere cool and tell your mates and drag them along. I dragged Sam along to the Bread and Roses. I'm sure it will take me to something interesting one day. But that kind of goes towards the political point as well, is that's got to come up from the grassroots, really. That's got to come up from us kind of saying to each other, you know, my dad's a squaddy, I'm working class, but I'm university educated because my mum and dad instilled in me the desire to go on and go to university. But they also said to me, you know, they didn't want to go, they had no interest in going to the arts, but they always supported me in doing creative things, and I'd drag mates along to go to art galleries, and so that they could see, actually, it's not just for posh people. There's cool stuff happening. Grab a couple of people. If one person grabs two people and brings them along, and they grab two more people and bring them along, and eventually we all build to, you know, where we want to go.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Thanks. I'd really like to back up what you're saying about telling your friends. I work work with a number of arts galleries in the city, and as part of Visual Arts Plymouth, who are behind the Weekender, so I'm really pleased to hear that you had a positive experience at the Weekender. So please go to things. These buildings are run for you with the money you have paid in taxes, and you're perfectly entitled to go into these spaces, so do it and then tweet about it, because these organisations are being encouraged to sort of pitch against each other for money rather than being encouraged to have more. So more than ever, they need people to cross that threshold and then to supply that evidence, which has to go back to Arts Council in reporting and City Council and other funders. But go to more arts things and get involved in this year's Plymouth Art Weekender, which is the 22nd to the 24th of September this year. And there are call-outs at the moment to list things, so get involved.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our session, so I'd like to thank our panelists, Justin, Helen, and Ray, for talking to us. I'd like to thank you for coming and joining in and listening to us. I hope we all got something out of it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today. Thank you very much.